today's lesson will be about. Today's lesson is going to be about emotions. Now, we all start with a primary set, and as we grow older, we acquire more of them.
When your emotions control your action, it affects not only yourself, but the people around you.
This will help. Sit down. Emotions are centered in the lower part of the brain.
It is complicated, yes, but mysterious no longer.
Emotional behavior is largely involuntary.
I can't believe that.
We have certain basic emotions which are controlled subconsciously. Notice your own emotional reactions. What did you feel? What did you do?
Under control, your emotions can make you healthier and happier and improve the lives of people around you.
This is pretty clever.
That's a rather simplified suggestion of a complex mental process, but you get the idea.
Well, we are continuing with our sermon series talking about emotions. And one of the things that we started out talking about was that our culture right now, our world, is a world that has a lot of anger in it. And so now we're at the point where we want to talk about anger. It's going to take a couple weeks to do that. And it's important to understand as we talk about this that you might think to yourself, well, I don't really have a problem with anger. The problem is that anger wears a lot of different faces, and so it might not be quite as simple and straightforward as it appears. We're going to look today at Ephesians chapter 4, starting in verse 25, and we're going to talk about the beginning part of this. Anger is going to be something that's a little bit more involved and complicated than some of the previous things that we've talked about here. And so it's going to take probably 2, maybe even 3 weeks to get through this, but I think that it's going to be helpful for us. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 4, verse 25. It says, "Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, excuse me, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you." Now, we might experience together a few coughs of mine. And I want to assure you, 2 COVID tests, it's not that. Some other variety. I will try my best to not do that, but it might happen. Please do not flee. The thing that we have to understand as we're going through this text is that it's kind of strange that anger here is kind of nestled in a bunch of other stuff. And I found that strange because, well, there's a few things that are strange about this passage. First of all, be angry and do not sin. Did you guys know that we're commanded to be angry? And you might say amen. Praise God. I have a cup here that's helping my scratchy throat. It seems like this is a great get-out-of-jail-free card for us that we have. How many of you think this is going to ride here all service long? This adds a little bit of tension to the service. Will it or will it not fall? So, the issue here is, do we get a get-out-of-jail-free card here? That God is commanding us, we're being commanded to be angry, and we think, oh, right, that's one I can keep. That's one that I'm okay with. Well, it's actually a lot more complicated than that, because what you see here, oh, man, you're taking all the fun out of it, but thanks. But there's actually a lot going on here. First of all, there's this idea of putting away falsehood. Let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbors, but why? For we are members of one another. So there's actually a lot going on. You know, this idea of being of being angry but not sinning is nestled in this idea that there's a connection between all of us that's going on. That there's more at stake here. There's a system, there's a relationship, there's an internet-connected web of relationships that are going on here. And those things have to be understood and respected. In fact, that's why it goes on to say, let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths. All of these things are part of something bigger. This bigger thing is the fact that there is a connection between all of us because of the way that God has created us. He's created us in His image, and He's created us to be in relationship with one another. And those relationships that we have with one another are based on the fact that within the Trinity itself, there is this relationship, this everlasting relationship of love that occurs there. And that is the model for the way that we interact with one another. Now, the problem is that oftentimes we have a way of dealing with anger that separates anger and tries to deal with it on its own. But you can't really do that, you see. Now, we're commanded to be angry, but we're commanded to not let the sun go down on our anger or not give the devil a foothold. We're commanded to be angry, but that anger has to be within bounds that God places on it. That anger needs to be a godly anger. It needs to be a productive anger, because there's a lot of places in the Bible where it talks about the downside of anger, and we are all aware of that. It's not that it's as simple as saying, well, just don't ever be angry ever. No, there's relationships that are involved here. There's a hierarchy that's being brought into play here. And there's a system that we're all integrated into. And that system calls for us at times to be angry, but to have that anger be part of the system. Now, as we go through this first sermon, we're going to have to understand, first of all, there's an idea of system collapse that we need to look at and study. Secondly, there's this idea of theological collapse that we need to look at and study. And finally, there's an idea of social collapse that we need to look at and study. And we need to do that because unless we do that, you won't ever get a handle on your anger. How many of you have ever tried to be less angry? It was irritating, wasn't it? In fact, nothing will make you more angry than trying not to be angry. Nothing will make you more frustrated. Nothing will get you going faster than trying really hard not to be angry. There's a reason for that. The reason is if you just try to take anger and isolate it and deal with it, it's never going to work, because anger, God has given you anger as a tool. And that's why you can't ever just get rid of it. You can't just excise it out of your life. It's like if you decide you want to lose weight. Have you ever just decided, well, I just won't eat? Anyone ever do that? I just won't eat. How does that work for you? I remember at times when I was trying to do intermittent fasting, and I don't know if you guys have ever done that, but there were times when I would be so hungry by the time I got home that I would open up the pantry and I would literally scarf down anything I saw in front of me because I was so hungry. Why? Because the thing is that hunger is a tool that God gave you. And if you just try to say, well, I'm just going to get rid of that, I just won't be hungry anymore, I just won't eat anymore, that's never going to work. And in fact, it's usually counterproductive. In the same way, anger is a tool that God has given you. And so you have to deal with it in the system that it exists. So first of all, let's look at system collapse. Now, system collapse is an interesting thing. And what system collapse is about is that in any highly integrated, complicated system, that it's actually very easy for that system to collapse. And it's especially easy when people don't know they're in a highly integrated, complicated system. That's actually one of the things that makes it incredibly easy for the system to collapse. Now, there's a lot of people that think that we might be in the midst of a system collapse. Why is that? Well, there's a lot of things that are going on that help us to understand that might be the case. Now, when we look at this, we have to understand that system collapse is something that happens quite often, and it's far from inevitable. I don't know, did any of you guys see recently the picture of the train tracks in Los Angeles that have been being looted? Anyone see that? So if you look it up online, there's some pictures of the Los Angeles area. There's a place in Los Angeles County, in the city of Los Angeles, where trains have to slow down and often stop and wait. And it just coincides that that's very close to a place where there's a whole bunch of homeless encampments there by the tracks. And so what's been happening is apparently the train has been experiencing about 80 containers being broken into every day. And there's a place there that, as far as you can see, there was endless Amazon packages and UPS packages just as far as the eye can see. They're littering the ground. In fact, it's so bad that it caused a partial train derailment because there's so much stuff piled up on the tracks. You have to see this. You've never seen anything like it. As far as you can see, imagine box after box, package after package, envelope after envelope. How many of you have ever gotten from Amazon, it says, hey, your package is going to be there, and then it says, oops, undeliverable. Go look on the tracks. It's probably there. You find it eventually. But what's happening is that people are breaking into the railroad cars, and they're going through all this stuff. Now you say to yourself, well, if you want to stop that from happening, well then, what do you need to do? Well, you can say you need to help the homeless problem there. And so Los Angeles County, the city of Los Angeles, has put $12 billion into helping the homeless problem. And one of the things that they're doing is they're buying up apartment buildings and giving them to homeless people. And so right now, one of the things that they're doing is it's costing them about $500,000 per unit to do this. So they're giving homeless people $500,000 condos and apartments. You know what's happened as a result of that? You have now a big player entering the market with really deep pockets, buying up entire apartment buildings. You know what's happening? Rent's going through the roof. You know what that's causing? More homelessness. And so, as a result, spending about $50,000, this is apart from buying the apartments, spending about $50,000 a year per homeless person, they now have more homeless people. And so you say, well, we should then arrest them. Well, apparently the train people, the train police, the railroad has their own police. They're arresting about 100 people a month, but none of them are being prosecuted. Why aren't any of them being prosecuted? Because the jails are full. So this is what we mean by a system collapse. It means that there's so many different aspects of the problem that are failing that you can't just address one problem and solve everything. That's what we mean by system collapse. And so complicated systems where you have a whole bunch of things interweaving, a whole bunch of relationships, a whole bunch of structures, a whole bunch of beliefs, a whole bunch of all those things coming together, what happens is if you start having multiple failures, then you can't just address one thing and solve the problem. You have to address the entire system. The whole system is collapsing. People are the same way. You are a lot more complicated than you seem or than you look. You have a whole bunch of different beliefs. You have a whole bunch of different relationships. You are not one thing. You're a whole bunch of things kind of crammed into a skin suit, and there's something called you that's trying to keep a lid on all of those things. Well, the problem is you can't just take out one of these different parts of you called anger and pull it apart and work on it and then stuff it back into yourself. It's not going to work. It's interesting that God has wrath and anger. And in fact, Romans chapter 1, verse 18 talks about this. And because we're made in the image of God and God has wrath and anger, there's a place for wrath and anger in our lives. It says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in things that have been made. So they are without excuse, for although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. So God has anger and wrath. In fact, that passage says that it's being poured out against mankind, and the reason for it is the suppression of the truth about who he is. Why? Why does that make God angry? Well, anger is given to us for a reason, and that reason is anger is a protective mechanism. Anger is a protective mechanism. It's vital that anger exists. God has given us anger so that we can protect things that have value. And that's when you get angry. You get angry when things of value in your life get threatened. How many of you have ever experienced a situation where you see your kid getting picked on? Anyone? Does it make you angry? Of course it does. I remember very clearly one day, and I've shared this with you, that I was going to school. I'd pretended to be sick, but my mom caught on that I wasn't sick, and she wanted to get back to work, so she sent me off to school. And our school was only like a block away, and so she watched me walk the whole way because she didn't think I was going to actually go. So she watched me the whole way, and as soon as I got onto school property, about 3 kids jumped me and started fighting me. And you know what she did? She marched down to the school office and demanded to know what was going on, what was being done. Why? Because she's not going to sit there and let me go through that without being angry about it. You see, the thing is, we couldn't actually have things of value in this life if we didn't have anger as a protective measure. And that's why the Bible actually commands us at times to be angry. You know, when you see things being done that are unjust, when you see things that have value being destroyed, you get angry, and God has given that to you. And in fact, he does the same thing. He gets angry when those things that he has created that have value get destroyed. And so when his name, his honor, his glory is being degraded, when it's being covered up, when it's being lied about, God gets angry about that. Why? Because that is the most worthwhile thing that exists. And everything that has value gains its value by reflecting his goodness and his glory. So not only does it affect him, but it affects everything else that depends on him. It's like covering up the sun. Anger comes out, unfortunately, in many ways. So a lot of times we think, well, I don't have a problem with anger. And what you mean is you don't have a problem with explosive anger. Because that's usually what we call anger, right? Something happens, you explode. But you might have a lot of problems with other types of anger, because anger comes out in a lot of different ways. Frustration. Sometimes we just get frustrated and I won't do anything about it. I won't say anything about it. Man, I'm frustrated. What usually happens when you do that, when you stuff it down, when you don't let it out, you just stuff it down? Maybe you're at your work and you can't let it show. Maybe you're angry with your boss and you can't do anything about him. And so you stuff it down. What happens to that? It generally comes out later with people who it's safer to experience it with. You're welcome, family, right? You go home and you say, oh, I'm mad, and they don't even know why you're mad. And you're not mad about that. But what's happened is there's something of value that's being threatened at your workplace, and you can't do anything about it. And so when the smallest thing of value gets threatened at home, you jump into action. Why? Because your anger wants to take action. You see, that's the thing, is anger is one of those things that just drives us. It makes things happen. And if you can't deal with this thing over here, that anger wants something to happen. It's going to happen somewhere else. Sometimes, in fact, it's interesting. There are some people who are in the mental health profession that think up to 95% of depression is just anger that gets turned inward to ourselves. And so you say to yourself, well, I don't have a problem with anger, but I'm depressed sometimes, but I don't have a problem with anger. No, you have a problem with anger. That's why you're depressed sometimes. Sometimes it's just comes out in a lack of care and concern and kindness. You know, there are times when we say to ourselves, well, I'm mad about that, but I'm not really going to do anything about it. But you know what we do? We just kind of write that person off. Or we just kind of decide we're not going to do anything about that. Or we just decide we're kind of done with that situation or that problem. You say, I don't have a problem with anger. I'm really easygoing. No, you do. You just are disguising it well. Now, it's important to understand that this anger is part of a bigger system. And these systems exist like a scaffolding that hold up an edifice that is something that we all deal with every day. It's really our society, our culture, our value system. All of this anger fits into this system. And without this system or scaffolding, the edifice cannot stand. There's these interlocking ideas, these interlocking beliefs that we all have that are part of us personally and also part of our culture and society. And all these things come together. And if you try to take just anger out of that and deal with it, it's not going to work because the rest of everything else exists as a part of this edifice. What I'm saying is that anger is about things of value getting threatened, and our society, our culture, and your own belief system create that value system. And anger is there as part of that, to uphold it, to protect it, to make it what it needs to be. And so you have to deal with the whole thing. So let's talk about the second part of this, which is theological collapse. In Romans chapter 1, verse 28 and 29, it says, "And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness." Does that sound angry? It is. Now the thing is, why were they given up to that anger? This is an important thing for us to understand. Why were these people that Romans 1 is describing, why were they given up to this anger, this envy, this murder, this strife, this deceit, this maliciousness? Why were they given up to that? Because they did not acknowledge God, and they did not see fit to acknowledge Him. They did not worship Him or celebrate Him, or they weren't thankful to Him. Because of that, they were given up to these things. Now, here's the thing that's important for us to understand. That this system collapse comes from a theological collapse. The Bible acknowledges that all of us are made in the image of God, and we all have needs and wants. In fact, Habakkuk 2:14 says this. It says, "For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as waters cover the seas." So basically what this passage is saying is the whole earth is going to be covered with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. In fact, that's what everything exists for. You want to know why the sun rises in the morning and sets in the evening? You want to know why the birds sing? You want to know why everything exists? You want to know why there's rainbows in the sky? You want to know why lightning goes from one cloud to the other and sometimes down to the ground? You want to know why you're here? Do you want to know why all of this exists? It's for the glory of God. And you say to yourself, well, okay, so what? No, it's really important. Glory is the thing that everything runs on. Glory is what it's all about. And you say to yourself, okay, well, that's not, so what? Well, you're part of that. In fact, you're a huge part of that. As a human being, you are a huge part of the glory of God. When you look at everything that's created, and you look at a lightning bolt, you look at a sunrise, you look at a mountain peak, you look at a butterfly, what is more glorious than all that? Human beings. In fact, the Bible says that they were made a little lower than the angels, but they were crowned with glory. You participate in this economy of glory that is the reason that all things exist. And because of that, you cannot live without glory. In fact, shame kills us. There's this movie called The Edge. And in the movie, there's a plane wreck that happens. And these three guys are out in the wilderness, and they're city people. In fact, one of them is a billionaire, and the other one's a photographer, and the other one's an assistant. And they just have no experience out in the wilderness. But the billionaire is kind of one of those guys that loves to learn things and has command of all these facts. And he asks them, he says, why do people die in the wilderness? Or what do they die of? What do people die of in the wilderness? And they say, the other characters say, I don't know what. And he says, they die of shame. And it's an answer that makes no sense at first, but throughout the movie you get an idea of what that means. Is people make mistakes. And when they realize they're in the position that they're in because of the mistakes that they made, they sit down and they die. It doesn't just happen in the wilderness. That actually happens in life. People die of shame all the time. Now, you don't see them dead. You don't actually, but what you see them is you see them stop living. They stop living because of the shame of all the mistakes that they've made in their life. They say, I'm just done with life. I can't do anything right. No matter what I do, it's going to go wrong. I can't. They stop trying because they're sure they're going to fail. And pretty soon, they're existing, but they're not living. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Why? Because people can't go on without glory. It's something of value. In fact, it is the thing of value. And when it's threatened, you get angry. Because you know that if you don't have it, you will die. How many of you were ever, as a kid, made fun of? That was funny, huh? No, it wasn't, right? When you were made fun of, did you think it was funny? Did you go, ha, ha? No. Did you get mad? Did you get mad? Did you get sad? Did you get depressed? Did that anger turn inward? Did you say to yourself, yeah, I am that? So that's what happens in depression. You're going to experience your anger some way, right? You're going to either experience the anger of saying, no, I'm not that, or you're going to experience depression and you're going to be mad at yourself, yes, I am that. I hate that I am. The reality is that you can't get through life without glory. But here's where the theological collapse comes from. Glory comes from a hierarchy of good and evil. And without that hierarchy of good and evil, you can't get glory. How many of you have ever played a game and you were losing? Anyone ever experienced that? You played a game and you were losing. Now, there's a couple of ways you can deal with that. You can get angry about it, you can get upset, but the other thing you can do is you can just say, well, let's not keep score anymore, right? Because that's actually the antidote to losing, because if there's no score kept, then I can't possibly lose. Now, here's the thing. I need you to understand that that's a valid strategy, right? You just kind of, you'll lose the scorecard. I remember we had the grade school kids, and we were playing miniature golf with them. And we decided from the beginning we were not going to keep score. Why? Because it just went so much smoother that way, right? Now, here's the thing. Life can go smoothly without that. But eventually what happens? You can say, I'm not going to keep score in this game. And then the next game, I'm not going to keep score in this game. And then the next game, I'm not going to... And then pretty soon, do you keep playing the game? No. Here's what our culture has decided to do. It doesn't like the fact that sometimes it loses glory, and so it wants to not keep score any longer. It says this hierarchy of right and wrong, this hierarchy of good and evil that exists, let's throw that out, because then we're all winners. The problem is that we're actually not all winners. We're not keeping score at all. Here's the problem with that. If you've ever been in a part of a little league or anything like that where they didn't keep score, it became boring to play the game. In fact, you either get frustrated or you get bored and you stop playing. Because why? Because it can't provide you with any glory anymore. Now, the reason you stopped keeping score was because you didn't want to lose glory by winning, but solution that you came up with means you're not going to get any glory because you can't win. You see the problem? You're not losing glory, but you're not gaining it either. And so what's the point of the endeavor? You're going to go into it and come out of it with the exact same amount of glory. So what was the point? Why did we do this? You see, there's a theological component to this that we have to understand, and I can assure you that you will not get over your anger problem without dealing with this component. There's a system-wide issue that has to be dealt with. There's a whole bunch of nodes that have to be dealt with in order for you to get a hold of your anger, and the first one is a theological one. There's this passage in Galatians chapter 5, starting in verse 14 and going to verse 15. It says, "For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another." The reality of the situation is that you need glory, you're going to try to get glory, and if you can't get glory, you're going to eventually start biting and consuming each other to get it. What happens when you can't get glory in a good way, in a healthy way? When the game no longer has any score, there's no meaning, there's no glory to be gained by playing the game, you're going to start taking glory from other people. And that's what happens, and that's what's happening in our society. You're going to start taking glory from other people. You're going to start stealing. Oh, you know what, that person, they're not great. That person's not great. Oh, I can't stand that person. I don't like it when they come around. They just think they're so good. There's all kinds of things that will happen in your life if you don't get a handle on this. When you cannot play the game together any longer, it will devolve into something that's not a game anymore. You can't solve your anger problem without understanding the theological roots. That anger exists to protect things of value, and the only way to value things is religiously. You have to engage in this struggle of glory and find meaning and purpose in it. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 23 and 24, it says, "Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ." What that's saying is this, is that there is this structure, this hierarchy of good. And guess what we're made to do? We're made to engage in the game of gaining glory by gaining good things. And that gives the struggle of our life meaning and purpose. Here's the thing. How many of you guys ever started playing an instrument? Ever started playing an instrument? Okay. Was that easy? No. So the thing is, what's the purpose in it then? Why do you do it? If it's not easy, why do you do it? Scott, you play a couple of instruments. Why do you do it? Because it's fun. How can it be fun? It's not easy at all. How many of you guys did not have fun learning to play an instrument? I will raise my hand. Scott, you're just weird. I'm sorry. So why do you play it? Yeah. So you see the glory that's possible, and you want to participate in that glory. And the thing is that everything in our life, have you ever met somebody who's really charming, makes you feel really good? And you see that, and do you ever say to yourself, well, I wish I could be more like that? Well, you can. It's not going to be easy. Why? Because we're naturally, and most of us aren't very charming. I mean that in the nicest possible way. Most of us just naturally aren't very charming, I'll admit to that. But the thing is, you see somebody who is, and most of the time you can say to yourself, well, that person's really charming. And there's a couple ways you can deal with that. You can say, well, they're not that great. They think they're so great, coming here all smiles and everything, woohoo. You can do that, or you can look at it and say, that's glorious. That's going to take work, I bet, to get like that. But the fact that that's glorious and I could have some of that, gives the struggle of life meaning and purpose. And here's the thing, you can jump into that and engage it and say, I want to be part of that. I want to be part of the struggle. I want to be part of getting that glory. And I don't know how far I can get, but I won't ever know if I don't try. And you can see that as giving your life meaning and purpose. And there's a million different ways you can have glory. In fact, God is so amazing. His glory is so unbounded that you could never exhaust coming up with the ways that you could reflect part of His glory. You could sit down for your entire life and just write one down every second, and you would never exhaust the ways that you can come up. If the world is full of them, and it gives meaning to your life. And you know what you're going to find if you engage in that meeting? You're going to find that some of your anger is going to start to diminish because you're actually in the game and you're actually getting some glory. And instead of sitting there and being frustrated and being angry and being upset because you don't want to play the game. And you just want to make sure that nobody says anything about you. Nobody thinks anything about you. Nobody takes anything away. There's this component to this that's theological, that's really important. Finally, really quickly, social collapse. So there's a theological collapse that's happening, and that is we don't want to engage in the game anymore, this game that our view of God sets up. But there's also a social collapse. The valuing of glory and its need for us is seen in social collapse. How many of you guys remember the playground as a really fun place? When you were growing up, recess time, so fun. How many of you see it as Lord of the Flies? Okay? It can be both, can it? It can be both. Because kids are they're harsh, aren't they? And kids do this thing where they'll make fun of you for anything. I got made fun of for being Toothpick was my nickname because I was super skinny. I beat that. I was super skinny, and I had big ears and a big nose, and I got made fun of for all kinds of things. And they would see that, and they would point it out, and when they found a soft spot, man, they would poke it, wouldn't they? And hopefully, as you got older and you became an adult, hopefully that stopped. Hopefully you're not around people that are still doing that. But adults have a social way of behaving with one another that supposedly recognizes the worth of the individual. You grow up and you think, well, that's not a very good way to go. It's not a very good way of gaining glory by poking at this person and diminishing theirs. And hopefully what happens is that there's a social way that we each of us builds each other up. And a lot of these have diminished. And I'm going to say that I understand if you think, oh, wow, I'm not doing very good at these. Go, join the club. I think most of us aren't. But these are things that in the past existed for a purpose that we no longer recognize. Dressing up for other people. Meaning, I think I told you guys about this. I went to the grocery store the other day, and this girl literally was wearing a t-shirt and slippers and underwear. And that's it. And you could tell. I couldn't believe it. I looked, and then I looked again, and I thought, what's happening? I looked around, and I looked at myself. Do I have clothes on? What's going on? It was like a weird dream was unfolding right in front of me. I was like, what's happening? No, she just couldn't be bothered. She had to get up and go to the store for something, and she couldn't be bothered to put pants of any kind on. It was very strange. That was taking casual a little too far. But here's the thing, the reason that people used to dress up was they used to dress up to show respect to the other people. And you think, well, that's weird, because now we think of dressing up as something that's about you and about showing off, but that's not the way it was. And I can show you this really easily, I think. Think about this. Think about going and meeting the president. What are you going to wear? You're going to wear something nice, right? Because he's the president. Think about that. That same... You answered that in your mind without hesitation. You're going to dress up because he's the president. Well, you dressed up for other people to show them the value that they had for you. paying attention. Just paying attention to people. We have so many things now. We have cell phones, we have this, we have that, all vying for our attention. Just paying attention to people. Saying hello to people and being polite. When I was a kid, I remember all the time, you'd go to the store, hey, hello, hello. You didn't know these people, hello, hello, hello. And you don't do that anymore. Using Mr. and Mrs., having good manners, having good table manners, having good manners just in general. Why did you do that? Those things, we stopped doing a lot of those things because they take effort. But here's the thing to understand is, yes, they take effort, but they take effort as a way of showing the other person that they have value. You're declaring the worth of the other person when you do those things. Why is this important? Why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about table manners in a sermon about anger? Here's the thing. There's a system, and anger is part of it. And I'm telling you, because I know this from my own experience, that you will find it much easier to deal with your anger with other people if you're showing them respect. Meaning, if you're saying hello to people, say, hey, how you doing? If you're treating them, using Mr. or Mrs., showing them, using terms of respect, doing actions that take respect, then that protects you against a lot of anger toward people, because it's hard to be angry with people that you're treating as people. When somebody's not a person, when they're just an object and they're in your way, it's easy to be angry and frustrated with them. But when they're an actual live human being that's worthy of respect, that has glory, and you're treating them that way, then treating them with anger is inconsistent, and at some point you have to make a choice. And the reason that society was developed with these habits and rules was to keep us from being at each other's throats. It was to help us to show glory to one another and did not be like it was in the playground. In Romans chapter 12, verse 10, it says, love one another with brotherly affection. I love this second part. Outdo one another in showing honor. Outdo one another. Outdo one another in showing honor. That's a fantastic verse. I mean, think about that when you're feeling frustrated and angry with the people at the grocery store or the people as you're driving down the road. Try to outdo yourself. Try to outdo everyone by showing honor, by showing respect, by showing that you care about people. And you will find that it's a lot more difficult to let your anger run away with you. Well, finally, we need to talk about application. Believe in God's glory. It's a great, great thing. Belong to Him through the covenant and be glorious by being transformed by His Spirit. There is so much life to be had when anger is used in the way it should be.
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow on our Facebook page where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out all of our past lessons and other videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian Church, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to His church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Have a great week, everyone.